And it's showtime. I have the doggies here. They are begging for treats because I have the treats next to me here. I thought it would be a good idea to put the treats next to me so that I wouldn't have them bothering me during the show, but no, it actually makes it worse. So we are in the middle of, or the first third of the Biblical Series 3, God and the Hierarchy of Authority. And so we are going to go ahead and start up with that now. I I hope that everybody enjoyed Survivals live this afternoon with Cat Out of the Bag. So I thought it was a great listen. And yeah, so we'll just go ahead and start up. So here, oh, wrong one, wrong one. Oh, boomer moment. So here we go.
So then you think, okay, so men have adapted to start to climb the male dominance hierarchy, but it's the set of all possible hierarchies that they're adapted to climb. And so then you think there's a set of attributes that can be acted out that can be embodied that will increase the probability that you're going to rise to the top of any given hierarchy. And then you could say, well, then as you adapt to that fact, then you start to develop an understanding of what that pattern constitutes. And so that starts to become the abstract representation of something like multidimensional competence. And that's like the abstraction of virtue itself. Well, and none of that's arbitrary, man. That's as bloody well grounded in biology as anything could be. And I think that's a really hard argument to refute. And like one of the things I should tell you about how I think is that when I think something, I spend a long time trying to figure out if it's wrong, because I like to hack at it from every possible direction to see if it's a weak idea, because if it's a weak idea, then I'd rather just dispense with it and find something better. And I've had a real hard time trying to figure out what's wrong with that idea. It seems to me that it's pretty damn solid. And then the idea that, if you watch what people do in movies and so on, and when they're reading fiction, it's obvious that they're very good at identifying both the hero and the anti-hero. We could say the anti-hero, generally speaking, the bad guy, is someone who strives for authority and position, but fails. Generally speaking, not always, but fails. So he's a good, bad example. You take a kid to a good guy, bad guy movie, the kid figures out pretty fast that he's not supposed to be the bad guy. And figures out very quickly to zero in on the good guy. And that means that there's an affinity between the pattern of good guy that's been played out in the fiction and the perceptual capacity of the child. And one of the things I told my son when he was a kid, and I used to take him to movies that were sometimes more frightening than they should have been, but one of the things I always told him was, I never said don't be afraid, because I think that's bad advice for kids. What I said was keep your eye on the hero, right? Keep your eye on the hero. And he was gripped by the movie and often quite afraid of them, because movies can be very frightening. So he just zero in on that guy, hoping, and you know what it's like in a movie, you hope that the good guy wins, generally speaking. And I mean, why do you do that? Where does that come from? You see how deeply rooted that is inside you. You bloody well go line up and pay to watch that happen. It's not an easy thing to understand, and it's so self-evident to people that we don't even notice that it's a tremendous mystery. And so is it so unreasonable to think that we would have actually, over the millennia, come to some sort of collective conclusion about what the best of the best guys are, best of the good guys are, and what the worst of the bad guys are? And to me, archetypally speaking, actual ruler becomes
Did I just have?
confused with the abstracted.
Oh my gosh! Did I just have Jordan Peterson on mute for this whole time? Oh my gosh! I forgot about that. I am so sorry. I will go back. The doggies were driving me crazy, so I put myself on mute. So Jordan Peterson was on mute. So let's start this up again.
And then the idea that, if you watch what people do in movies and so on, and when they're reading fiction, it's obvious that they're very good at identifying both the hero and the anti-hero. We could say the anti-hero, generally speaking, the bad guy, is someone who strives for authority and position, but fails. Generally speaking, not always, but fails. So he's a good, bad example. You take a kid to a good guy, bad guy movie, the kid figures out pretty fast that he's not supposed to be the bad guy. And figures out very quickly to zero in on the good guy. And that means that there's an affinity between the pattern of good guy that's being played out in the fiction and the perceptual capacity of the child. And one of the things I told my son when he was a kid, I used to take him to movies that were sometimes more frightening than they should have been. But one of the things I always told him was, I never said, don't be afraid, because I think that's bad advice for kids. What I said was, keep your eye on the hero, right? Keep your eye on the hero. And he was gripped by the movie and often quite afraid of them, because movies can be very frightening. So he just zero in on that guy and hoping, and you know what it's like in a movie, you hope that the good guy wins, generally speaking. And I mean, why do you do that? Where does that come from? You see how deeply rooted that is inside you. You bloody well go line up and pay to watch that happen. It's not an easy thing to understand, and it's so self-evident to people that we don't even notice that it's a tremendous mystery. And so, is it so unreasonable to think that we would have actually, over the millennia, come to some sort of collective conclusion about what the best of the best guys are, best of the good guys are, and what the worst of the bad guys are? And to me, archetypally speaking, thinking of that as the hostile brothers, so that's Christ and Satan, or Cain and Abel, for example, very common mythological motif, the hostile brothers. It's like those are archetypes. It's like the Satan, for example, is by definition the worst that a person can be. And Christ, by definition, this is independent of anything but conceptualization, is by definition the best that a man can be. Now, as I said, I'm speaking psychologically and conceptually, but given our capacity for imagination and our ability to engage in fiction, and our love for fiction, and our capacity to dramatize, and our love for the stories of heroism and catastrophe and good and evil, I can't see how it could be any other way. So that's part of the idea that's driving the notion of the evolution of the idea of God, and even more specifically, driving the evolution of the idea, at least in part, of the Trinity.
So this is interesting. And sorry for the boomer moment there, guys. I was just talking to my mother a moment ago about, she's all up on Reddit and what's going on with the stonks and stuff like that. And she was like, why do they hate boomers? And I'm like, no. It's a pejorative for anybody who's doing poorly with tech. So yeah, I had my boomer moment, and that was not planned at all. I have my doggies here, and they're making a lot of noise. Hello, Shaman. Good to see you. Yeah, the interesting idea that, that Christ is the ideal man is that, Christ didn't always, a lot of times the whole, what would Jesus do sort of thing. People think of it as totally peaceful and totally loving and people forget that Jesus flipped tables, and formed a whip and started whipping people to get out of his father's temple, because they had changed it into a sort of, it had gotten corrupted to a sort of money exchange sort of thing and all that kind of thing. So, if we look at Jesus as the ideal man, it's somebody who, for the most part, does flee the crowds that are trying to kill him, but then on the other hand, does flip tables every once in a while. The character of Jesus is a lot more complex than people often think. We often put it down to a two-dimensional thing, but it's much, much more than that. It's much more sophisticated than that. So,
So God is an abstracted ideal formulated in large part to dissociate the ideal from any particular incarnation or man or any ruler. And
Yes.
there's another rule in the biblical stories, which is that when the actual ruler, I mentioned this before, when the actual ruler becomes confused with the abstracted ideal, then the state immediately turns into a tyranny and the whole bloody thing collapses.
Yes.
So the idea is so sophisticated. You know, one of the things that we figured out, and this was a hard thing to figure out, was that you had to take the abstraction and divorce it from any particular power structure, and then think about it as something that existed as an abstraction, but a real thing, right? Real in that it governed your behavior, in everyone's behavior, including the damn king. The king was responsible to the abstracted ideal. Man, that's an impossible. That is such an impossible ideal. You know, why would have they agreed to that 5,000 years ago? But one of the things you see continually happening in the Old Testament is that as soon as the Israelite, for example, the Israelite kings become almighty, the real God comes along and just cuts them into pieces, and then the whole bloody state falls apart for like hundreds of years. It's like, I think that's a lesson that we have not thoroughly, consciously yet learned. It's still implicit in the narratives. We still haven't figured out why that's the case. Again, I think that's a real hard argument to dispense with. So,
and there's a great point to this. If anybody was on Survival's live earlier today, which was very good, there are a lot of people who like to call Trump the God Emperor sort of thing. And that's a very dangerous thing to be, because, you know, if we make our leaders into gods, then they can do no wrong. And the state does immediately turn tyrannical. And there is that danger. And people are doing it now, even with Biden, you know, saying that he is God. With the walls going up around Washington, D.C., you know, suddenly walls work, and suddenly we have a tyrannical ruler in there. So it's very, very dangerous to equate, you know, leaders to gods. You know, we like to elevate them to that point, but it's a very, very dangerous thing to do. So, and as Jordan Peterson points out, the second that happens with Jewish leaders, you know, the legs get cut out, you know, beneath them. You know, you have the whole book of Lamentations and things like that. And then you have the state gets taken over for hundreds of years. So it's that tyranny that leads to the downfall, that then leads to the being taken over by outside forces. And that just repeats itself and repeats itself and repeats itself through time. So there really is something to that idea. And it seems that we're almost trying to repeat it nowadays. So kind of scary.
All right. So we looked at this a little bit. The Trinitarian idea is that there's a father. That's maybe the dramatic representation of the structures that underlie consciousness, the embodied structures that underlie consciousness. And then there's the son, and that's consciousness, but in its particular historical form. That's the thing that's so interesting about the figure of the son. And then there's consciousness as such, and that seems to be something like the indwelling spirit. And so, I mean, these psychological ideas came from somewhere, right? That they have a history. They didn't just spring out of nowhere. They emerged from dreams and hypotheses and artistic visions and all of that over a long time. And maybe they get clarified into something like consciousness, but it takes a damn long time to get from watching, you know, from two chimpanzees watching each other to a human being saying, well, we all exhibit this faculty called consciousness. I mean, man, that's a long journey, you know, that's a really long journey. And there's going to be plenty of stages in between. One of the things I really liked about Jean Piaget, the developmental psychologist, was that he was so insistent that children act out and dramatize ideas before they understand them. And Merlin Donald, who's a psychologist at Queen's University, wrote a couple of interesting books along those lines as well, looking at the importance of imitation for the development of higher cognition in human beings. And so the notion that we embody ideas before we abstract them out and then represent them in an articulated way, I think is an extraordinarily solid idea. And I really can't see how it could be any other way. And if you watch children, you see that. Like, Think about what a child is doing when he plays house or she plays house. The child acts out the father or the mother. But what's so interesting about it, you think, well, look, isn't that cute? She's imitating her mother. It's like, no, she's not. That's not what happens. Because when your child imitates you, it's very annoying because you move your arm and then they move their arm and you move your head. They copy you. No one likes that. It's direct imitation. That's not what a child's doing when the child is playing. What the child is doing is watching the mother over multiple instantiations and then extracting out the spirit called mother. And that's whatever is mother-like across all those multiple manifestations, and then laying out that pattern internally and manifesting itself in an abstract world. It's so sophisticated. It's just, that's what you're doing when you're playing house or having a tea party or taking care of a doll. It's not like you've seen your mother take care of a doll. You haven't seen that. It's that you're smart enough to pull out the abstraction and then embody it. And certainly the child is attempting to strive towards an ideal at that point. She's not lighting her doll on fire, or it's certain exceptions, but generally ones that we try to not encourage, right? So you see that capacity in children, and it's something we also know that if children don't engage in that sort of dramatic and pretend play to a tremendous degree, that they don't get properly socialized. It's really a critical element of developing self-understanding and then also developing the capability of being with others, because what you do when you're a child, especially around the age of 4, is you jointly construct a shared fictional world. We'll play house together, let's say, and then you act out your joint roles within that shared fictional world, and that's a form of a very advanced cognition. It's very sophisticated. I see that, and Piaget did as well, and so did Jung, and so did Freud, these brilliant observers, and also Merlin Donald, these brilliant observers of the manner in which cognition came to be. They noted very clearly that embodied imitation and dramatic abstraction constituted the ground out of which higher abstract cognition emerged. And how could it not be? Because obviously we were mostly bodies before we were minds, clearly. And so we were acting out things way before we understood them, just like the chimpanzees act out the idea that, you have to act reasonably sensibly if you're a head chimpanzee, or you're going to get yourself ripped apart. And you see that in wolves, because when wolves have a dominance dispute, they puff up their hair at each other to look big, and they growl and bark, and they're very menacing. And one wolf chickens out, rolls over, puts up his neck, and basically what he's saying is, yeah, I'm pretty useless, so you can kill me if you want to. And the other wolf says, yeah, you're pretty useless, and I can tear out your throat, but tomorrow we might need to bring down a wolf, or a moose, so I'll keep you around. And it's not like they think that, because they don't know. They don't think that. They act it out as a behavioral pattern. Then if you're an anthropologist or an ethologist, and you went and watched the wolves, you'd say it's as if they were acting according to the following rule. And that often confused me, because I thought, well, do wolves act out rules? And I thought, no. A rule is what we construct when we articulate a behavioral pattern. Right? We observe a stable behavioral pattern, and when we articulate it, we can call it a rule. But for the wolves, it's not a rule. It's just a stable behavioral pattern. And so we acted like wolf troops or chimpanzee troops, all of that, for untold tens and perhaps hundreds of millions of years before we were able to formulate that pattern of behavior into anything approximating a story or an image, and even longer before we could articulate it as a set of ethical rules.
And this is why a lot of the woke sort of movies don't work, is that, most of our stories are based on patterns and things that have gone on for thousands and thousands of years. And they're just the old stories told in new ways. The story of Star Wars, as amazing as it was for the 1970s, was not a new story at all. It was the hero's journey. And who was it? It was Joseph Campbell, who wrote about the hero with 1,000 faces. and how this was just an old story being retold in a new way, in a science fiction way. And, a lot of the stories that you run into out there, there was one that was a retelling of the story of Redbeard. And my friends were so astonished that I had hooked it back to this old story. And I was like, no, there's all these stories are stories that have been around for thousands and thousands of years. And the woke stories don't work because the woke stories haven't been around for thousands and thousands of years. These are stories that they're trying to inject something very new onto our behavior patterns, and it doesn't work because the behavior pattern isn't there. There's nothing for it to ground itself in. So of course, all of these so-called, woke storylines, they kind of fail because everybody goes, yeah, that's cute and all, but nobody believes it. And it's funny that we would say nobody believes fiction. I mean, we know it's fiction to begin with. So to think that, oh, nobody believes it is kind of strange. So, but that's what we say, is that nobody believes that kind of story could happen because it's all wokeism. It's all something that's really, really new. And so it doesn't really make sense. So.
I'm dwelling on this. I know I've repeated some of this before, but it's so important because, there's this tremendous push, especially from the social constructionists, to make the case that ethics is arbitrary, morality is relative. There's no fundamental biological grounding in relationship to human behavior, especially in the category of ethics. And I think that's, well, first of all, it's dangerous because that means that people are anything you want to turn them into. And you bloody well better be careful of people who think that. And second, I just think that the evidence that that's wrong is so overwhelming that we should just stop thinking that way. I mean, and that's partly why I'm also attacking this from an evolutionary perspective. There's lots of converging lines of evidence that ethical standards of at least of the most crucial sort not only evolve but also spontaneously reemerge. For example, in the dramatic play of children. So we need to take that seriously. And so, well, that's partly what we're doing here, trying to take that seriously. So. Okay, so the idea there, at least in part, was that the father employed the son to generate habitable order out of chaos. I also think there might be something more proximally true about that as well, too, because one of the things we do know, here's something that's cool about men. Men are much more criminal than women. And that, by the way, that does not look like it's sociocultural, partly because it peaks when testosterone kicks in around 14. Like it just spikes the hell up. And then it stays pretty high until about 27. And so standard penological theory, for those of you who don't know this, is that if you have a repeat offender, a guy who just won't stop getting in trouble, you just throw him in prison until he's 28. And it isn't like you're rehabilitating him or anything. It's like by 28, he's done with his criminal career because the crime curve peaks at 15 and then falls down around 27 or so. It burns out. And that's often, by the way, that's often when men get married and settle down and stabilize. One of the things that's cool about that is the creativity curve for men is almost exactly the same thing. It ramps up when testosterone kicks in, and then it starts to flatten out around 27. The curves match very, very closely. So that's quite cool. It's the creativity element of it that I'm particularly interested in because the creativity is in many ways an attribute of youth. And that's, look, I mean, if you looked at that sentence and you stripped it of its religious context, what you would say is that, well, the older people use the younger people to generate creative ideas and renew the world. It's like, yeah, that's what happens. And we also have no idea how many of the things that we discovered or invented as human beings were stumbled across by children and adolescents.
Yes.
Because they're much more exploratory. They're less constrained by their already extant knowledge structures, and they're less conservative. So,
and this is the exact same pattern that Douglas Adams found, is that if you stumble upon something when you're around the age of 13 or 14, and it's something that happens to be a wave that catches on in all of society, you can make a lot of money at it. And it's right at that age, 13, 14, that creativity, when that sets off, that's really the forward drive of everything going forward. And by the time you're, 27, 28, when that testosterone ramps down again and you're building a family and everything like that, then what you've already constructed from your creative time that's what kind of ratchets you forward. But at the same time, there's already another crop of 14, 13-year-olds coming up behind you, and they're catching on to whatever creative thing that's going on, and this cycle repeats time and time and time again. So it's interesting that those two theories overlap, the one with Douglas Adams and this one with Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, that seems just right to me. So, and right in an extraordinarily important way. Because it also means that if you're an actual father, one of the things that it means is that that's part of what you should be encouraging your son to do, right? Which is because the role of a father is to encourage. That is clearly the role. And to encourage is to say, well, go out there, confront the chaos of the unknown and the chaos that underlies everything. Grapple with it, because you can do it. You're as big as the chaos itself, and do something useful as a consequence, and make your life better and make everyone else's life better, and you can do it. And man, that's the right thing to tell. That's the right thing to tell young men. Talking to young women is more complicated because they have more let's say, issues to deal with because their lives are more complicated in some ways. But that's definitely the right thing to be telling your son. And one of the things that I've really noticed recently since I've been lecturing, especially in the last 7 or 8 months, most of my audience has been young men, and I've talked a lot to them about both truth and responsibility. And I think that those are the two things that underlie this capacity. And there seems to me to be a tremendous hunger for that idea. It's not the same idea as rights, it's a very different idea. It's the counterpart to rights. And so life is hard, it's chaotic, it's difficult, it's really definitely a challenge. And so you can either shrink from that and no bloody wonder because it's going to kill you. It's no joke, man. Or you can forthrightly confront it and try to do something about it. Well, what's better? And then you say to the person, look, man, you could do it. Like, that's what a human being is like. And if you just stood up and got yourself together, and you find out by trying that you can in fact do that. And I do think that's a great core religious message as far as I can tell, and I think that's deeply embedded in this sort of idea. So, all right, so this is what I've been telling you. This is something like how knowledge itself is generated. First of all, there's the unknown as such, and that's really what you don't know anything about. And generally, when you encounter that, you don't encounter it with thought. You encounter it like this, right? And that's the first representation of the absolutely unknown. It's something that is beyond your comprehension and it's terrifying. And because it's beyond your comprehension, you cannot perceive it, you cannot understand it, but you still have to deal with it. And the way you deal with it is that you freeze. That's what a basilisk does, say, to the kids in Harry Potter, right? They take a look at it and they freeze. That's the snake, the terrible snake of chaos that lives underneath everything. You see that thing freezes you. And that's because you're a prey animal. But at the same time, it makes you curious. And so that's the first level of contact with the absolute unknown, is the emotional combination of freezing and curiosity. And that's reflected, I think, in the dragon stories. The dragon is the terrible thing that lives underground that hoards gold or hoards virgins. Very, very strange behavior for a reptile, as we pointed out before. But the idea is that it's a symbolic representation of the predatory quality of the unknown combined with the capacity of the unknown to generate nothing but novel information. And you can see that as very characteristic of human beings because we are prey animals, but we're also unbelievably exploratory and we're pretty damn good predators. And we occupy this weird cognitive niche. And so one of the things we've learned is that.
And that's one of the things that Jordan Peterson doesn't know about, is that the myth of the dragon from the Norse mythology is that any human being that could become a dragon. So the idea of hoarding virgins is actually not such a strange idea when you think of it as a person who has turned into a dragon. And what do they hoard? They hoard what is valuable. They hoard gold and they hoard virgins. And so those two things put together, if you realize that, and C.S. Lewis uses this in his 12 Chronicles of, or the Chronicles of Narnia, is that, Diggory turns into a dragon because of this one gold armband that he decides to take, and he guards it jealously, and that sort of jealousness and the idea of hoarding and all of that is that human beings can become dragons. And so the hoarding of virgins means that, not only have you economically hoarded what can make the next generation, prosper, but you've hoarded biologically what can make the next generation prosper. So I wish that Jordan Peterson knew a little bit more about the Norse sources of this. So I think he'd be able to expand his ideas a little bit more.
If we forthrightly confront the unknown, terrifying as it is, there's a massive prize to be gained continually. And so that seems to be true, right? As true as anything is. And then I would also say that idea, and we know that one of the metaphors that underlies God's extraction of habitable order out of chaos at the beginning of time is an older idea, a more archaic idea, that God confronted something like the Leviathan. That's one of the words for the serpent-like chaos creature that's often used in the Old Testament, or there's the Leviathan and the Behemoth. Yeah, that's the other thing. And so there's this idea that I think probably came from the Mesopotamians, that God, either in the son-like aspect or in the father-like aspect, is the thing that confronts this terrible beast that represents the chaotic unknown and cuts it into pieces, and then sometimes gives the body parts to the populace in order to feed them. So you can see a hunting metaphor there as well, but it's deeper than that. And so, all right, so the first thing is that there's the absolute unknown, and the unknown is what you do not understand. It's what's beyond the campfire. Maybe it's what's beyond the tree, even more anciently, when we lived in trees. It's out there where you don't know. And what's out there? Crocodiles and snakes and birds of prey and cats and all sorts of things, like predatory cats, and they will eat you. But there's utility in going out there to find out what's there. Like maybe you go and you don't kill the snake, you kill the damn nest of snakes. And that makes you pretty popular, just as you should be. That accelerates your reproductive potential, let's say. And we're descended from people who did that. And so we have this notion about how the world is structured that's deeply embedded in our psyche. Like really, really deeply, way, way down, way below the surface cognition, way down in the limbic system, in these ancient parts of the brain that are like 60 million years old or 100 million years old or older than that. Ancient brain structures. And so the first thing we do is we act out our encounter with the unknown world. And we act that out in the same way, in a manner that's analogous to the manner that's presented as a description of what it is that God does at the beginning of time to extract habitable order out of chaos. And I will tell you about the other part of that now. You act it out first. And then the second thing is you watch people who act it out and you start to make representations of that. That's stories, right? And maybe you admire them. And then after a long time, you collect a bunch of those stories, and then you can say what that is. You can articulate it as a pattern. And so, and this is something Nietzsche also figured out to begin with, because prior to Nietzsche, I would say, he did so many things first. It was quite remarkable. There was an idea that you first think and then you act. And people like to think that. Of course, it's complete bloody rubbish, because you're as impulsive as you can possibly imagine. You're always doing things before you think. And sometimes that's a really good idea. So the idea that you see things and then think and then act, it's like, really? No, I'm sorry. I don't do that. Like, no one I know does that, and they certainly don't do that when they're emotional. You act first. And one of the things that Nietzsche said very clearly was that our ideas emerged out of the ground of our action over thousands and thousands of years. And then when philosophers were putting forward those ideas, what they were doing wasn't generating creative ideas. They were just telling the story of humanity. It's already there. It's already in us. It's already in our patterns of behavior. And it strikes me that that's, well, he was a genius, and that was one of his many, many observations of pure genius. And so you can think about it, you can think about it like this too, is that there's the unknown, and then you act in the face of the unknown, and then you dream about the action. And that's what you're doing in a movie theater. And then you speak about it. And so, and of course, once you speak about it, that affects how you dream, and how you dream affects how you act. It's not like all of the causal direction is one way, because it's not. These things loop. But it's still from the unknown through the body, through the imagination, into articulation. That's the primary mode of the generation of wisdom, let's say. And you can easily map that onto an evolutionary explanation, because the body comes first, right? And then the imagination, which is the body in abstraction, and only then the word. And of course, that's exactly how things did evolve, because we could imagine things long before we could speak. At least that's the theory. So, and I represented it. This is an image from my book, Maps of Meaning. So the idea is that this is the fundamental representation of the unknown as such. It's half spirit, because it partakes of the air like a bird, and it's half matter because it's on the ground like a snake, and that's what you think is there when you don't know what is there. That's how your body reacts to what's there when you don't know what is there. You know that too, because if you're alone at night, and maybe you're a little rattled up for one reason or another, maybe you watched a horror movie and there's some weird noise in the other room, it's dark, and you could just try this once. It's like, so you're on edge, you think, you want to turn the light on and go in the room and see. Don't do that. Just open the door a little bit and sneak your hand in. And just watch what your imagination fills that room with, right? And then you remember what it's like to be 3 years old and dead and afraid of the dark.
Yeah.
Right? And I read a good book on dragons recently that had a very interesting hypothesis about them, I thought. One of the things the guy did was track, can't remember his name, unfortunately, track how common the image of the dragon was worldwide. It's unbelievably widespread. It's crazily widespread. And he thought that this was actually the category of primate predator. And the predator was, so predator is a weird category, right? Because like there's crocodiles in it, and there's lions, and they don't have much in common except they eat you. So it's a functional category. And so this is the imagistic representation of the functional category of predator. And his predator theory was, well, if you're a monkey, then a bird would pick you off, like an eagle. And so that's this.
The wings.
And then if it wasn't an eagle, it was a cat, because they climb trees and give you a good chomping. And then if it wasn't a cat, then you go down to the ground and a snake would get you, or maybe a snake would climb up the tree, because snakes like to do that and get you. And so that's a tree cat snake, basically.
Cat, snake,
Tree,
bird.
Cat, snake, bird. And that's the thing you really want to avoid. You don't want to come across one of those. And so, and then, the other thing it does is breathe fire, which is quite interesting, because obviously fire was both greatest friend and greatest enemy of humanity. And we've mastered fire for a long time. It might be as long as 2 or 3 million years. That's what Richard Wrangham, I think it's Wrangham, he wrote a book recently on, I think it was Wrangham, who wrote a book on when human beings learned to cook. That was about 2 million years ago. And cooking increased the availability of calories.
Yep.
You know how chimpanzees are sort of shaped like they're ugly. They're shaped like a big bowling ball, They look really fat, and they're short and they're wide, and that's because they have intestinal tracts that are like 300 miles long, and the reason for that is because they have to digest leaves. And so you go out in the forest and sit there and eat leaves for a whole day and see how that works out for you. They have no calories in them. So chimps spend about, I think it's 8 hours a day chewing. And it's because what they eat has no nutritional value, and then they have to have this tremendous gut in order to extract anything at all out of it. Human beings at some point just thought, oh, to hell with that, we'll cook something. And then we traded our gut for brain, which, more or less has worked. And I think it's made us a lot more attractive as well. So the idea here was that, well, that's the basic archetype of the unknown as such. And then I like the St. George version of this. It's so cool because St. George lives in a castle, and the castle is partly falling down, and it's partly because there's a dragon that's come up to like it's an eternal dragon. It's come back to give everyone a rough time, which always happens because the eternal dragon is always giving our fallen down castles a rough time, always. And so then St. George is the hero who goes out to confront the dragon, and he frees the virgin from its grasp. And I would say that's a pretty straightforward story about the sexual attractiveness of the masculine spirit that's willing to forthrightly encounter the unknown. It looks like a straight biological representation to me. And it's a really, really old story, right? It's the oldest written story we have, and that's basically the Mesopotamian creation myth, the Enuma Elish, which basically lays out precisely that story. And it's replayed. I mean, I bet you, the moviegoers among you, especially the ones that are more attracted to the superhero, the really flashy sort of superhero type movies, you've probably seen the St. George story like 150 times in the last 10 years.
Yep.
You never get tired of it because it's the central story of mankind. So you've got the unknown as such, and that is what you react to with your body. The existential terror and extraordinary curiosity are gripping you. And then it's like the unknown unknowns that, who's the politician under Bush? Rumsfeld. Yeah, I think the reason that phrase caught on so well is because he nailed an archetype. There's unknown unknowns and there's known unknowns. And that's the unknown unknown. And you have to be able to react to an unknown unknown because they can get you.
Yeah.
You can't just plead ignorance because then you're dead. That doesn't work. Like, human beings are the sort of creature who has to know what to do when they don't know what to do. And that's very paradoxical. And what we do is we prepare to do everything. That's right. We're on guard. We prepare to do everything. Very, very stressful, but also very engaging and very, very much something that heightens consciousness. And maybe those circuits are permanently turned on in human beings because we also know that we're going to die. And no other animal knows that. And so sometimes I think that our stress circuits are just on all the time. And that's part of what accounts for our heightened consciousness. So you have your unknown unknowns, and then you have you have the unknowns that you actually encounter in the world, like the mystery of your romantic partner when you have a fight with them. It's like, well, we're having fights. Who the hell are you?
Yeah.
You're not the absolute unknown because I know something about you, but you're the unknown as it's manifesting itself to me right now, right? And then there's
And that's the Billy Joel song, The Stranger. The stranger kicked me right between the eyes. And so that's very much the idea that, somebody can be an unknown and known at the same time. And Shaman makes this comment that I missed. Fire could burn down all his village, food stores, shelters, etc. Yes. And the fire coming from the mouth, as opposed from like in some of the Chinese stuff, they have like lightning bolts coming from the fingers. But why does fire come from the mouth? Well, because words can set you on fire, and those things can be fire as well. And that kind of fire that, the Promethean fire that can, set your whole world on fire and burn your whole life down, that it comes from the mouth is very, very interesting. There's all sorts of psychological things to think about there. So that's a very good point, Shaman. Yeah, fire is both friend and foe. It can destroy everything, but it can also cook your food.
The known that we inhabit, and then there's the knower. And the known is given symbolic representation, as far as I've been able to tell, in patriarchal form, in the form of a male deity. And the unknown, as you encountered, is given feminine form.
Yes.
We won't get into that too much, but if you're interested in that, you could look at my Maps of Meanings lectures, or maybe take a look at the book. But I think it's a good schema for religious archetypes. I've worked on it a long time. It seems to fit the Jungian criteria quite nicely. It maps nicely onto Joseph Campbell's ideas. He got almost all his ideas from Jung.
There we go. Joseph Campbell.
And it also makes sense from a biological and an evolutionary perspective, as far as I can tell. That's a lot of cross-validation, at least in my estimation. So back to the hierarchy of dominance. Well, let's take a look at it a little bit. So I'm quite enamored of lobsters, as some of you might know.
If you've been following the book,
I found out. This just blew me away when I found it out. I mean, I've done a lot of work in neurochemistry, functional neurochemistry, because I used to study alcoholism and drug abuse. And alcoholism to study alcohol, you have to know a lot about the brain because alcohol goes everywhere in the brain. It affects every neurochemical system. And so if you're going to study alcohol, you kind of have to study neurochemistry in general. And so I did that for quite a long time. I really got enamored of a book called The Neuropsychology of Anxiety by Jeffrey Gray, which is an absolute work of genius, although extraordinarily different. Like, I don't know how many references that book has. It's like, must be 1,000. And Gray actually read them. And worse, he understood them. And then he integrated them into this book. And so to read it, you have to really master functional neurochemistry and animal behaviorism and motivation and emotion and neuroanatomy. Like, it's a killer book, but man, it's really rich. It's taken psychologists about 40 years to really unpack that book. But one of the things I learned about that was just exactly how much continuity there was in the neurochemistry of human beings and the neurochemistry of animals. It's absolutely staggering. It's the sort of thing that makes the fact of evolution something like self-evident. I do think it's self-evident for other reasons that I'll tell you about later. I think evolution, or I think natural selection, random mutation and natural selection is the only way you can solve the problem of how to deal with an environment that's complex beyond your ability to comprehend. I think what you do is you generate endless variants because God only knows what the hell's going to happen next. Almost all of them die because they're failures, and a couple propagate. And the environment keeps moving around like a giant snake. You never know what it's going to do next. And so the best you can do is say, well, here's 30 things that might work, and 28 of them are going to perish. If you're an insect, it's like the ratio is way, way higher than that. So anyways, back to the lobsters. These creatures engage in dominance disputes. And I think dominance is the right way to think about it, because lobsters aren't very empathic and they're not very social. And so it really is the toughest lobster that wins. And what's so cool about the lobster is that when a lobster wins, he flexes and gets bigger. So he looks bigger because he's a winner. It's like he's advertising that. And the neurochemical system that makes him flex is serotonergic. And you think, well, who cares? What the hell does that mean? I'll tell you what it means. It's the same chemical that's affected by antidepressants in human beings. And so, like, if you're depressed, you're a defeated lobster. Like, you're like this. I'm small. Things are dangerous. I don't want to fight. You give someone an antidepressant, it's like they stretch, and then they're ready to take on the world again. Well, if you give lobsters who just got defeated in a fight serotonin, then they stretch out and they'll fight again. And that's like, we separated from those creatures on the evolutionary timescale somewhere between 350 and 600 million years ago, and the damn neurochemistry is the same. And so that's another indication of just how important hierarchies of authority are. I mean, they've been conserved since the time of lobsters, right? There weren't trees around when lobsters first manifested themselves on the planet. And so what that means is these hierarchies that I've been talking about, those things are older than trees. And so
that's
one of the
amazing.
truisms for what constitutes real from a Darwinian perspective is that which has been around the longest period of time, right? Because it's had the longest period of time to exert selection pressure. Well, we know we evolved and lived in trees something on the order of 60 million years ago. We're talking 10 times as far back as that for the hierarchy. And so the idea that human beings, that the hierarchy is something that has exerted selection pressure on human beings is, I don't think that's not a disputable issue. How it's done it and exactly what that means, we can argue about, but like that sort of biological continuity is just absolutely unbelievable. It was funny because I revealed this finding. I didn't discover this, I read about it, but I talked to my graduate students about it. I used to take them out for breakfast, and they were a very contentious, snappy bunch. And they were always trying to one-up each other, and they were quite witty. And for like 6 months, until it got very annoying, every time one of them one-upped the other, they'd stretch themselves out and snap their hands like So that was very funny. It was really very funny. So you see this in lobsters, and so that's pretty amazing. So, and one of the other things that's really cool about lobsters is that, let's say you've been top lobster for a long time, but you're getting kind of old, and some young lobster just, whales the hell out of you, and so you're all depressed. But the thing is, your brain is dominant. But you don't have much of a brain because you're a lobster. And so now what are you going to do? Because you just lost. And the answer is, well, your brain will dissolve. And then you'll grow a subordinate brain.
Yes.
Yeah, and so that's what we're thinking about too, right? Here for a couple of reasons. First of all, if any of you have ever been seriously defeated, in life, you know what that's like. It's like it's a death, a descent, a dissolution, and if you're lucky, a regrowth, and maybe not as the same person. That's what happens to people with post-traumatic stress disorder, right? Their brains undergo permanent neurological transformation, and they then inhabit a world that's much more dangerous than the world that they inhabited to begin with. But we also know, too, if you have post-traumatic stress disorder or depression, that your hippocampus shrinks, right? It dies and shrinks. And you can sometimes get it to grow back. Your hippocampus shrinks and your amygdala grows. And the amygdala increases emotional sensitivity. And the hippocampus inhibits emotional sensitivity. And so if you've been badly defeated, the hippocampus shrinks and the amygdala grows. Now, if you recover, the hippocampus will regrow. And antidepressants actually seem to help that. But the damn amygdala never shrinks again. And so, well, so that's another lesson from the lobster. It's quite a terrifying one. But
yeah, that is a terrifying lesson to consider, is that, because I've undergone this myself with my whole migraine saga, is that the surgeon that I dealt with, he first injured me very badly by sticking a needle into my skull. And I was telling him that, it hurt. Oh my gosh, this hurts. And finally, I just screamed, and they heard it 3 floors down in the pharmacy. And they almost needed, the surgeon had screwed up so badly that they almost needed a pair of pliers to pull the needle because he had driven it that far into my skull. But that wasn't enough to give me PTSD. What then gave me PTSD is that this problem repeated itself. It wasn't just one trauma, but it was 2. And that was that when it came time to have the actual surgery for the occipital nerve stimulator, I woke up on the operating table. Actually, it was 3 traumas. So I woke up on the operating table, and they immediately injected me with something. I kept saying my face was burning, and I didn't know why. And I woke up on the operating table, and I could hear them talking, about this and the other. And then they went, oh, SHIT. And they injected me with something because I had started to crawl off the operating table. I guess they hadn't sewn me up or whatever. And so they put me out completely again. And I woke up. But then it was after that, I got MRSA as a result of that surgery. And that nearly killed me. And I've still got the scars on my chin and on my face here. You can see that kind of white spot. And on my cheek over here, you can see this white spot. And that's from the MRSA that I got as a result of the surgery. And that nearly killed me. And it was a result of those 3 traumas. I ended up in a state of PTSD where I couldn't even go back to Seattle. I had gone over to a friend's house for 4th of July and then ended up in the hospital because the MRSA was so bad. I couldn't go back home. For weeks and weeks, I lived on my friend's couch. And I could not go back home. I think I was there for, oh gosh, it was at least a month. And I didn't care if I came home and I found everything in my house stolen. I did not care. I could not go home because that was going back to Seattle where, that all this trauma had taken place. And as a result of that, my emotionality grew. And my sense of hyper responsiveness to stresses grew. And it's only over the past, I don't know how many years, that I've been able to, sort of get my other areas of my brain to grow back. But I'm still hypersensitive to that sort of emotional part of whatever's going on. So Shaman says, crushing defeats, then there can be rebirth, reborn, baptism, samsara, reincarnation, recovery. Yes, there absolutely can be. There absolutely can be, but it takes time. And that's one of the things that we don't really understand, is how much time it takes to regrow that part of our brain that can deal with these things, but that the amygdala stays that large is kind of impressive. So F3G Angry Joker. Hey, Angry Joker, good to see you. Glad you're here. So Yeah, we're talking about trauma and recovery from that, and lobsters. Lobster. I have a lobster pendant that I keep on my necklace next to my medical alert that I have. That's this pendant here. But then I also have the lobster pendant because I truly, I mean, Jordan Peterson bringing me back to Christianity and being able to, fold these ideas of evolution and Christianity back into one another and let me see that science isn't anathema to religion, but it's actually, it's a coevolution of the two things. Is it absolutely saved me. It absolutely saved me. So I will get back to Jordan Peterson here.
But it's it's so interesting that you can relate to that, right? It's like I get what that poor crustacean's going through,
Yeah, exactly.
So, okay, here's the rats, and this is from Jaak Panksepp's work. He was the first guy who figured out that rats giggle.
Isn't that amazing?
And you might think, well, what kind of stupid thing is that to study? It's like $50,000 research grant for giggling rats, So, but he discovered the play circuitry in mammals. That's a big deal, right? It's like discovering a whole new continent. There's a play circuit in mammals. It's built right in, so it's not socially constructed. There's a biological platform for that. And so what Panksepp would do with rats, he found out if you take a rat pup away from its mother, it dies. Even if you feed it, even if you keep it warm, it dies. Now you can stop it from dying by taking a pencil with an eraser on the end and massaging it, right? Because rats won't live without love. And the same thing happens to human babies. And we saw that in Romania when there was that catastrophe at Ceausescu in the orphanages, where the orphanages were full of unwanted babies because Ceausescu insisted that every Romanian woman was constantly pregnant. So the orphanages stacked up with unwanted babies, and lots of them didn't even have names. And they were warehoused, warmth, shelter, food. Devastating. Lots of them died. Most of them died before the first year. And the ones that didn't die were permanently dysfunctional because you have to be touched if you're a human being. It's not an option. You have to be played with. It's not an option. It's part of neurodevelopmental necessity. And you have to also play fair. So, because otherwise you produce a very disjointed child who isn't able to engage in the niceties of social interaction, which is continual play in some sense and reciprocity. So what Panksepp did with his rats, he noticed that male rats, juveniles, really like to wrestle. And they wrestle just like human beings wrestle. They pin each other, for crying out loud. It's like that rat has just lost. He's down for a 10 count, right? And so what you do is you take juvenile rats and you can find out that they want to play because you can attach a spring to them and then they'll try to run, and you can measure how hard they're running by how hard they're pulling on the spring, and then you can estimate how motivated they are. And so you can find out that a nice, well-fed rat who doesn't have anything on his mind will still work hard to play to enter an arena where he's been allowed to play before. He'll work for that, so that you think, well, the rat's motivated. So the two rats go out there and they play, and so they're playing like dogs play, and everyone knows what that looks like. If you're, if you have any sense about dogs, they kind of go like this, and kids do that, and maybe you do that with your wife if you're going to play with her a little bit. My poor wife, man, when she was a young, she had older siblings, and so she wasn't played with as much when she was little as she might have been. And I used to you take a pillow, and you go like this 3 times, right? That means look out, a pillow is coming your way. So I go 1, 2, 3, whap! And she looked, she was completely dismayed at me. She's like, what do you do that for? And I thought, well, I eventually taught her that rule. The other thing I used to do.
You eventually taught her that rule. Oh my gosh. That's awful and wonderful at the same time. So Shellman said PTSD cuts ruts running down a mountain, from the rain, but in the brain. Then we have to train work on ourselves to make new ruts, better ruts in ourselves. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It's the idea that, you repeat something like a rut in a record machine, a record player. If the groove is deep enough, it creates a good sound. But if the groove is shallow, the sound isn't really there. And so, it's one of those things where you have to repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat. And that lays the neural pathway that creates a rut in the brain that we can then, rely on. And you can fall into ruts, or you could, but that's not necessarily a bad thing to fall into a rut, but it can be. And so both of these ruts, you can fall into a rut of prayer where, you do prayer at the same time every day, and that becomes a rut, but it's a constructive rut as opposed to a destructive rut. Where, like, I realized when I was going to 12-step groups like Al-Anon, that when you say the prayer at the beginning, it's this rut you fall into, and then, oh yes, it's this comfort of something familiar. That rut is something familiar. So yeah, the ruts can be both positive and negative. But I think it's so funny that he had to train his wife how to play.
The thing I used to do, is so sometimes she'd come at me like this when we were playing around, and I'd grab her wrists and I'd knock her hands, her knuckles together, and she used to just get completely annoyed about that. And I thought, that's what you do. You just open your hands. Well, she didn't know that either. So she hadn't been played with enough when she was a little rat. And so, anyway, so you let the little rats go out there, right? And so let's imagine one of them is 10% bigger than the other. And so the 10% bigger rat wins, because 10% is enough in rat weight to ensure that you're going to be the pinner rather than the pinnee. Okay, so that's fine. So the big rat pins the little rat, and now the big rat is the authority rat. And so then the next time that the rats play, the little rat has to invite the big rat to play. So the big rat's out there being cool, and the little rat pops up and does the whole "will you play with me" thing, and the big rat will deign to play with them. But if you pair them repeatedly, unless the big rat lets the little rat win 30% of the time, the little rat will not invite him to play. And Panksepp discovered that. It's like, I read that just blew me away. It's like, that is so amazing, because you see, well, first of there's an analogy to Piaget's ideas about the emergence of morality out of play in human beings, so that was very cool. But the notion that was built into rats at the level of wrestling was, and they're deeply social animals, right? They have to know how to get along with one another. And most of their authority disputes, dominance disputes, you don't want them to end in bloodshed and combat. Because, if you're rat 1 and I'm rat 2, and we tear each other to shreds in a dominance dispute, rat 3 is just going to move in. It's really not a great strategy. And so it'd be better if we could settle our differences, somewhat peacefully. And so rats, anyway, Panksepp figured out that rats play, and not only that they play fair, and they seem to enjoy it. He also figured out, this was really cool too, that if you give juvenile rats attention deficit disorder drugs, Ritalin, suppresses play. So that's worth thinking about. Why do you have to give juvenile human beings amphetamines in school? Well, because they need to play. Well,
That is really interesting. That is hella interesting. And I don't remember seeing that in the last time that I viewed this. That Ritalin suppresses the play instinct, because that's exactly why I stopped taking Ritalin. I was diagnosed of ADHD not until after I had graduated college, so in my 20s. And it was wonderful for work. I could remember as many, usually I have like a 3Q memory. I can remember 3 things, but if you give me a 4th thing to remember, then the first thing has to fall out of the queue in order for me to remember, it's only 3 things and that's it. But when I took Ritalin, I could remember as many things as I wanted, and I could remember things that had fallen off, like hours before. it's like I could keep as many things in my brain as I wanted to, and I just put it in a box over there. And when I needed to pick it up, I could just pick it back up again. But the thing that I hated is when I took Ritalin, I no longer was creative, and it just absolutely. And later it found out it messed with my heart as well, and so I couldn't take it because it messed with my heart, and that was the main thing. But one of the big things that I realized is that it killed my creativity. I was wonderful at work, but then when it came time to not work, I was just a drooling mess. I was not even there. And so the fact that Ritalin kills the play instinct, and that we're giving this to kids, is just a horrible, horrible, horrible thing. Horrible idea. We can't kill the play instinct in kids, because that is vitally, vitally necessary to, how they do things. And so, yeah, I completely forgot that this was in the series. So
they don't get to play. They don't get to wrestle around. I mean, that's oppression as far as I can tell. They don't get to wrestle around. That's fine. Feed them some amphetamines, man. That'll shut down the old play circuits. Well, here's the other problem is Panksepp found out that if you don't let juvenile male rats play, their prefrontal cortexes don't develop properly. Surprise,
yes.
Surprise, you're not letting them mature. It's like, what else would you expect? So,
yes.
That's something to think about. Really hard, I would say. So
dangerously
also,
hard.
There's some wolves going at it. Well, not exactly. There's some wolves having an authority dispute. That's more technically speaking, and a lot of it's posturing. They tend not, well socialized wolves tend not to hurt each other during authority disputes because, well, for obvious reasons, it's too dangerous, and so they have other ways of demonstrating who should be listened to, authorities. And there's chimps doing that. This particular, I think, if I remember correctly, I think it's right. This is a really cool picture because I think this chimps don't like snakes, by the way. So, for example, if you take a chimp that's never seen a snake and you show it a snake, it is not happy. It will get the hell away from that snake. If you bring a chimp anesthetized into a room full of chimps, the chimps will all get away from that and then look at the body. They don't like that either. And if you bring a big snake into a chimp cage, even if the chimps have never seen it, like they'll get away from it and then stare at it. And chimps out in the wild, if they see a big snake, they'll stand there and they have a noise that means something like, holy crap, that's a big snake, It actually means that technically, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But they stand away from it, and then they make this noise, which means, oh my God, look at the snake. And then they'll stand there for like 24 hours looking at the snake. And so the snakes are really, really, they're super stimuli for chimpanzees. So that's pretty interesting. And this chimp seemed to learn how to take this dead snake and go scare other chimps with it. And that was partly how he established his authority. And well, there's a threat, and like if I was you and I was around that chimp, I would take that threat seriously because those things are no joke, man. And you see the same thing here with I don't remember what kind of monkey that is, but
macaque
agonistic behavior, and so and there has been recent research showing that in higher order primates that there is snake detection circuitry that's built into them, right? So it's not learned. It's deeper than that. Now, for a long time, psychologists knew for a long time that I could make you afraid in a conditioning experiment much faster using a snake or a picture of a snake than a gun or a picture of a gun. So we can learn fear to snakes very rapidly, spiders as well. And so then people thought, well, maybe we were prepared to develop fear to snakes or spiders, that sort of thing. But the more recent research has indicated that it's more than just prepared, is that we have the detection circuitry built right into us. And well, it's because, well, why wouldn't we? That's really the issue. It's like, it's not really that much of a surprise, unless you.
Sorry for the weird pauses there. They've also found out that children who have never seen even a dog will have nightmares about wolves. And that sort of fear circuitry is built into us as human beings. dealing with wolves. If you've ever dealt with a wolf it's so much bigger than a dog. So much bigger than a dog. And they can do amazing, like 10-foot fences mean nothing to them. They can just leap right over them. And so, yeah, a child who has never seen a dog or a wolf will still have nightmares about wolves chasing them. And that seems to be very much built into our circuitry as well. So, yeah, it's our dreams tell us so much more about our evolution than we could even ever imagine. So, so yeah, let's get back to it.
You think of human beings as a blank slate, and if you
Yeah,
think that,
we're not blank slates.
I don't know. You should crawl out of the 16th century. That's how I would look. Because I mean, that's just gone. That idea. It's so wrong. So maybe you can think about this as a dominance hierarchy, but wolves look for credibility and competence as well, and chimpanzees don't like brutal tyrants, and so we'll talk about it as a hierarchy of authority. And so, well, this is kind of how it starts to develop. You see, well, these girls are negotiating the domestic environment here and how to behave properly and how to share and all that and take turns. And so they're negotiating the hierarchy of authority. And if you're good at reciprocity, it's sometimes you're the authority and sometimes the other person is the authority. That's fair play, right?
Yeah.
And so these boys are doing the same thing, and you see they're all smiling away. And so it looks like aggressive behavior, and people who are not very attentive and who are paranoid and who don't like human beings confuse this with aggression, and they forbid it at schools, which is, I know when my kids were going to school, for example, this was quite a while ago now, they were forbidden to pick up snow on the off chance they might throw a snowball. And we know how terrible that is.
Oh my
So what
gosh.
I told my son is that he was perfectly welcome to pelt any teacher he wanted to in the back of the head with a snowball, as long as he was willing to suffer the consequences of doing it. And I don't know if he ever did, but he was certainly happy with the idea, which made me very happy about him. So, yeah. So kids need to do this. They really, really seriously need to do this. It's what civilizes them. And that needs to happen between the ages of 2 and 4, because if they're not civilized by the time they're 4, then you might as well just forget it. And that's a horrible statistic, but it's unbelievably well borne out in the relevant developmental literature. Like, there's lots of aggressive 2-year-olds. Most of them are male.
Yep.
And if they stay aggressive past the age of 4, they tend to be lifetime aggressive. They make no friends. They're outcasts. They're much more likely to end up antisocial, criminal, delinquent, and in jail. And so
Prison.
Kids need to be socialized between the ages of 2 and 4. And that's particularly true for the more aggressive males. And most of the aggressive 2-year-olds are male. And that isn't socialization, by the way. So there's a more abstract representation of the same sort of thing. And I'm trying to make the case that the hierarchy of authority emerges out of a game-like matrix, an underlying game-like matrix. And that's one of the things that's so brilliant about Jean Piaget. He figured that out. It's so smart. And he was interested in the biological origin of morality. And he identified it. He traced the origin to play and the emergence of morality out of play. And it's so smart. I just can't believe how smart an idea that was. Because it's the bottom-up construction of morality. Now, Piaget was a constructionist, and to some degree a social constructionist. He underestimated the role of biology. But that doesn't invalidate his theory. It's really easy to put a biological underpinning underneath Piaget's theory. We know the biology well enough to do it quite nicely now. So, I mean, the fact that Panksepp, for example, could identify the play circuit is a really good start with that, right? Because play has been around so long that we have a circuit that's dedicated to it. And so that's a very, very ancient issue. And so, this is very much an abstraction of a game here. And then, of course, you get the ultimate abstraction in representation. Representation like that, where even the landscape of the game is fiction. And of course, we've migrated to a large degree into those sorts of fictional landscapes, fictional books, movies,
Yep.
video games.
Yep.
So it's the same. It's an extension of the same thing. So practice for real life that shades in some cases into real life itself. So, all right. More representations of God the Father. I like these representations. I like the triangle idea. I mean, I don't know why God is wearing a triangular hat. It's kind of a strange fashion choice, but I think it's associated with the idea of the pyramid, and I
Yes.
think that's associated with the idea of the hierarchy of authority. And I think that's why the Egyptians put their pharaohs inside pyramids. I know there's more to it than that, but I think some of that has to do with the notion of this hierarchical structure. You see this on the, now that's speculative, obviously, and I don't want to make too much of it, but I can't help but think that there's something to that. See, that's on the back of the American dollar bill. I like that a lot. That's like the Eye of Horus from the Egyptians. And so the idea here is something like at the top of the hierarchy is something that is no longer part of the hierarchy.
Yes.
Right? So if you move up the hierarchy enough, what happens is that you develop the ability, as a consequence of moving up that hierarchy, to be detached enough from the hierarchy so you're no longer really part of it, and so that you can move in all sorts of different hierarchies. And the idea here is that the thing that you're really developing is the capacity to pay attention.
And also note that on our dollar bills, with that pyramid hierarchy, it says, "In God we trust," because it's that no man can be trusted. It's only God that can be trusted because God is separated from the hierarchy of men. So that's another good. I mean, our dollar bills are filled with so much amazing sort of symbology. It's fascinating to just look at one every once in a while.
Let's say, from a mythological perspective, the one thing that seems to compete with the idea of the spoken word as the source of the extraction of habitable order from chaos is the eye, is the capacity to pay attention. So Marduk, for example, the Mesopotamian creator god, who emerged in the hierarchy of Mesopotamian gods and came out at the top, right? He was the victor of the gods. He had eyes all the way around his head, and he could speak magic words. And I really like that. I really like that idea. And the Egyptians developed that idea too, because their god Horus was the eye. Everyone knows the Eye of Horus. That image is so compelling that we still know about. Everybody has seen the Eye of Horus with a really open pupil. And what the Egyptians learned was that the open eye was what revivified the dead society. It's so smart. So what do you do if your life isn't in order? Bloody well pay attention. That isn't the same as thinking. It's a different process.
Yeah.
Paying attention, thinking is like the imposition of structure in some sense. I know I'm oversimplifying, but paying attention is something like watching for what you don't know. And so like one of the things I often recommend to my clinical clients if they're having trouble with a family member is, number one, shut up. Don't tell them anything about yourself. And I don't mean in a rude way. It's just like no more personal information. Number two, watch them like a hawk and listen. And if you do that long enough, they will tell you exactly what they're up to.
Yeah.
And they will also tell you who they think you are.
Yep.
Then you'll be shocked because they think you're something, generally speaking, that's not like what you are at all. And when they tell you, it's like a revelation to both of you. But attention is an unbelievably powerful force. And you see this in psychotherapy too, because a lot of what you do, and in any reparative relationship, is really pay attention to the other person.
Yep.
Pay attention and listen. And you would not believe what people will tell you or reveal to you if you watch them as if you want to know, instead of watching them so that you'll have your prejudices reinforced. That's usually how people interact. It's like, I want to keep thinking about you the way I'm thinking about you. And so I'm going to filter out anything that disproves my theory. That's not what I'm talking about at all. It's like, I'm going to watch you and figure out what you're up to. Not in a rude way, none of that. I just want to see what's there. And that'll be good for you, probably, and also be good for me. And so that's the idea that, climbing up a hierarchy of authority can give you vision, and that vision can transcend the actual hierarchy. And I think that's also that's the metaphysical space that an artist occupies. Because artists really aren't in a hierarchy, they're outside of hierarchies. You've watched The Lion King, most of you? Yeah. That's Zazu, the little bird that's the eye of the king. That's the same thing there. So, and that's echoed in this idea as well. So that's some more ideas of hierarchies, same idea. This is, right? gold, silver, bronze. Why gold? Gold is the sun. Gold is pure, right? So
Gold doesn't rust.
Is that the thing that's at the top of the hierarchy is incorruptible because gold doesn't mix with anything else, right? It's this sort of metal that doesn't ever become corrupted. It's a noble metal. It doesn't become corrupted. And so it shines like the sun, and it's associated with what's ever at the top of the hierarchy. And the gold medal is a disc like the sun, and it's awarded to those people who've occupied the top position and who are manifestations of the ideal. And here's I'll tell you a quick story. So imagine that you're watching an Olympic contest. I found this happens to me very often with gymnastics because the gymnasts are so absolutely unbelievable, you know. So you watch a gymnastic performance, and the person's out there bouncing around like, you know, you can't even imagine doing it. They're so perfect at it. So you see this person, they're going through this routine. They're just absolutely spectacular and flawless at it. You know, at the end, they stop and everybody claps, and they're all excited to see what a human being can do. And that's why we're in the audience watching, because we want to see what a human being can do. And the judges go like 9.8, 9.8, 9.8, and everybody's thrilled. And then the next contestant comes out, and it's like, well, they're just basically screwed, right? It's like this person came out there and was perfect. How are you going to top that? That's an interesting question, because this is a representation of what you do to top perfection itself. And you can do it. And here's how you do it. And you know this, even though you don't know, you know it. So let's say the next contestant comes out, and they're kind of shaky because it's like, oh man, the bar is being raised high. So what they do is they put themselves right on the edge of chaos.
Yes.
And you can tell by watching them that they are one bloody fraction of a second from catastrophe. They're pushing themselves farther than they've ever gone in the direction of their perfection. And everyone in the room is so tense they can hardly stand it, right? You can hear a pin drop, and that person is flipping around, and it's just right on the edge of catastrophe. And at the end, they go like this, you know? And there's that gesture, the triumph that goes along with that. And everybody rises in one instant and just claps like mad. It's like, well, why? What are you doing? What are you doing when you're doing that? Right? You can't even help it. It grabs you right in the core of your being, and you stand up, and it's an act of worship. That's what it is. And you saw someone go beyond their perfection into the domain of chaos and establish order right in front of your eyes. And you're so thrilled about that. You know, you're happy to be alive, and everyone's celebrating it all at the same time.
Even though they didn't do it.
The amazing thing. And that's what, well, sometimes that's what this represents, and sometimes that's what this represents. And that's what we're trying to get at, because that's at the pinnacle of the hierarchy, right? Not only are you doing what you should be doing, but you're doing it in a way that increases the probability that you'll do it better the next time you do it. And then you could say, here's another thing to think about along the same lines. And I know we haven't got Adam and Eve yet. You tell your kids to play fair, right? You say, it's not whether or not you win, it's how you play the game.
Yes.
And you say that, and you don't really know what you mean. You feel kind of stupid saying it, even though you know it's true. And your kid looks at you like there's something wrong with you because he doesn't know what you're talking about either. But you know it's true. And so here's why it's true. Life isn't a game. It's a set of games. And the rule is, never sacrifice victory across the set of games for victory in one game. Right? And that's what it means to play properly. You want to play so that people keep inviting you to play, because that's how you win. Right? You win by being invited to play the largest possible array of games. And the way you do that is by manifesting the fact that you can play in a reciprocal manner every time you play, even if there's victory at stake. And that's what makes you successful across time. And we all know that, and we even tell our kids that, but we don't know that we know it. And so we're not adapting ourselves to the game and victory in the game. We're adapting ourselves to the meta game and victory across the set of all possible games. And that's what that's exactly what, as far as I can tell, that's exactly what this is aiming at too. That's the same idea, that there's a mode of being that transcends the particularities of the localized contest. That's the other way to think about it. And to act morally is not to win today's contest at the expense of the rest of possible contests. And again, I don't see that as something that's arbitrary. It's not relativistic. There's an absolute moral stance there, and everyone recognizes it. And I also think it's the key to success. And I would also say it's very much akin in a strange way. Like the person who is the master at being invited to play the largest possible number of games, is also the same person. I haven't quite figured out the precise relationship between these two, is also the same person that goes out forthrightly to conquer the unknown before it presents itself as the enemy at the door. They're the same thing.
Yes.
Now, I haven't figured out why that is exactly, but well, I'll figure it out eventually. When I do, I'll tell you if you're interested. So, okay, so here's some other ideas of God as hierarchical authority figure. So strip the religious preconceptions off what you observe and just look at what you see. Well, look, there's primate looking upward at dominant figure. That's what you see there. Now, it's very interestingly symbolically represented because you have God the Father there with the cross. And I think what that means, as far as I can tell, is that there's a recognition there in the image that the person who's most dominant is the one has the most authority, is the one who's voluntarily accepted the suffering that's part of being. And that's what that picture represents. It's like the authority holds that, says this is what you have to accept, and that transfixes the viewer because of the fact that it's true. And you think, well, is that true? Okay, well, think about it this way. Do you like brave people or do you like cowards? Well, that's
yes.
pretty straightforward. And what's the ultimate act of bravery? It's to come to terms with the fact that you're mortal and limited and to live forthrightly regardless. Well, obviously, that's at the core of what's admirable. And why would we presume that that's not the case? We act as if that's the case. It's what everyone dreams and wishes that they could do. I mean, assuming that you dispense with the idea that you're going to be immortal. I suppose that might be worth wishing for too, or perhaps not. Immortal is a very long time, but you certainly want this. And that image says, well, this is what you should be. And we've got that same opening into the sky going on in that image that I showed you before. It's like this is a transcendent truth that constantly remanifests itself across time and space. And Jung would say it's built into your psyche, that image. Now, there are elements of it that are culturally constructed. It wouldn't necessarily have to be the cross, although the cross is a very old symbol. It's far older than its use in Christianity, and it's been used in many, many religious representations. But that echoes, the soul echoes with that. And then there's Moses up there on the mount receiving the law. And so we'll talk a lot more about that when we get to Exodus. But if we get to Exodus. So, well, look, where does it happen? Well, on a mountain. Well, that's a pyramid. That's up, right? That's up. It's up. It's up in the stratosphere. It's up in the sky where you look upward. Okay, and then so what's happening to Moses? Well, here's a bit of a clue, as far as I can tell. I figured this out partly again by reading Jean Piaget, because one of the things that Piaget said about kids was that they first learn to play a game, but they don't know what the rules are. Meaning that if you have a bunch of kids together, they can play a game. But if you take one of the kids out of the game when they're young, say 6, and you say what are the rules, they can only sort of give you a representation. So you take 6-year-old 1 and he'll tell you some of the rules, and 6-year-old 2 will tell you different rules, and 6-year-old 3 will tell you different rules. But if you put them all together, they can play. So they have the knowledge embodied either individually or in the group. The knowledge is there to be extracted. Well, then they get a little older, they can extract the rules. And then they start to play by the rules. And then Piaget's last step was, well, it isn't just the kids play by the rules, it's that they learn that they can make the rules. And he thought about that as moral progression. First you can play, then you can play by the rules. Then you learn, maybe, because he didn't think everyone learned this, that you're actually the master of the rules. That doesn't mean the rules are arbitrary, but it means that you can be the generator of the rules, assuming that you know how to play the game. And he thought about that as a moral progression. And then I thought, well, that's exactly what happened to Moses in the story of Exodus, because Moses is out there leading all those Israelites around, and they don't have a law, they don't have a lawgiver, they have a tradition. They're all crabby because, well, they're in a desert. It's like they're in a tyranny, but now they're in a desert. It's like, that's no improvement. So they're going to get pretty bitchy about it. And so they're worshiping false idols and having one catastrophe after another. And they get Moses to judge their conflicts. And so he does that for God only knows how long. forever. Crabby Israelites come to Moses and bitch at him. It's like, well, he did this and she did that. And so then he has to figure out how to make peace. And he does that so long that one of his, I think it's his father-in-law, tells him he has to stop doing it because he's going to exhaust himself. Well, then you think, well, what's happening? Well, and I'm not assuming that this is like a literal historical story. I think, again, it's a condensation. Well, any group has a set of customs, just like a wolf pack does. And so then the customs are being manifest, and someone who's a genius is watching and thinking, okay, well, what's the rule in this situation? What's the rule in this situation? What's the rule in this situation? And then in his imagination, the rules turn into a hierarchy, and then he goes up on the mountain and he goes bang, and he thinks, oh my God, here's the rules that we've been living by all this time.
Yes.
And that's the revelation of the commandments. Well, and you think, well, how else could it be? You think the rules came first and obeying them came second?
No.
No. The rules come first. Sorry, the actions come first. The obeying them comes first. And then you figure out what everybody's up to, and you say, hey, look, this is what you've been up to all along. Everybody goes, oh, yeah, that seems to make sense. And if it didn't, who would follow them? No one was going to follow them if they don't match what's already there. You just think about that as unjust. And so that's portrayed here as a cataclysmic human event. It's like,
and that's what I was talking about earlier with all these woke movies and everything like that, is that, unless it's something we've been doing this entire time, unless it actually reflects human behavior that's been going on for a long time, unless it resonates with us, we just discard it and don't want anything to do with it. We say, no, that's BS. I don't know what that movie was about. It's just, whatever. So all this wokeism that they're trying to forcefully inject into movies is not going to resonate because it's not based on anything that we've been doing for a long time. And it's something new that they're trying to force upon us, that we reject the whole thing. And that's why these woke movies get rejected. So.
Like, oh my God. We've been chimpanzees. We've been in this hierarchy of authority for so long. We have no idea what we're doing. And all of a sudden, poof, it burst into revelatory consciousness. And we could say, here is the law. And you'd say, well, is it given by God? Well, hey, it depends on what you mean by God. We could start with that presupposition. But it's not like it just came out of nowhere. It took it. And this is something else Nietzsche observed so interestingly. And he said, that a moral revelation was the consequence of a tremendously long process of initial construction and then formulation. Thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years of custom, of building custom, before you get the revelation of the articulated law. And that's a description of the pattern that works. And let's say, well, what's the pattern that works? It's the game that you can play with everybody else day after day with no degeneration.
Yes.
And that's another thing Piaget figured out that's so brilliant, and that's his idea of the equilibrated state. It's an extension of Immanuel Kant's idea about the universal maxim, right? Act in a way so that each action could become a universal rule. That was Kant's fundamental moral maxim, and Piaget put a twist on that. He said, no, that's not exactly it. It's act in such a way that it works for you now and next week and next month and next year and 10 years from now. And so that while it's working for you, it's also working for the people around you and for the broader society. And that's the equilibrated state. And you could think about that as an intimation of the kingdom of the city of God on earth. It's something like that. And it's based on this idea that a morality has to be iterable.
Yeah.
And, there's been lots of simulations online already, artificial intelligence simulations of trading games, right? I mean, the people who've been studying the emergence of moral behavior, say in artificial intelligence systems, have already caught on to the idea that one of the crucial elements to the analysis of morality is iterability.
Yeah.
You can't play a degenerating game because it degenerates. Like, obviously, you want to play a game that at least remains stable across time. And God, if you could really get your act together, maybe it would slowly get better. And of course, that's what you hope for your family, right? That's what you're always trying to do, unless you're completely hell-bent on revenge and destruction. It's like, is there a way that we can continue to play together that will make playing together even better the next day?
Yes.
That's what you're up to. well, I don't see anything arbitrary about that. And part of it, and this is also why I think that bloody postmodernists are so incorrect, because they say something like there's an infinite number of interpretations of the world, and that's actually true. But then they make a mistake and they say, well, no interpretation is to be privileged over any other interpretation. It's like wrong. That's where things go seriously off the rails, because the interpretation has to be, and this is the Piagetian objection, is like, if you and I are going to play a game, rule 1 is we both have to want to play.
Yes.
Rule 2 is other people are going to let us play. Rule 3 is we should be able to play it across a pretty long period of time without it degenerating.
Yes.
And maybe rule 4 is, while we're playing, the world shouldn't kill us.
Yes.
So there are not very many games, like you don't send your kids out to play on the superhighway, right? So they're not playing hockey on the superhighway because the world kills them. And so there's an infinite number of interpretations, but there is not an infinite number of solutions. And the solutions are constrained by the fact of the world and our suffering in the world, and then also constrained by the fact that we constrain each other. And so that's where I think that's going like dreadfully, dreadfully wrong. So, all right. It's really fun to look at these old pictures once you kind of know what they mean. At least that's what I've discovered, is that once I kind of understand the underlying rationale for, someone worked hard on that. That's an engraving, right? They took a long time making that picture. They're serious about it. When you understand what it means, all those people, they're prostrate at the revelation of the law. It's like, well, no wonder. It's like, break the law and see what happens. Break the universal moral law, man, and see what happens. I see people in that situation, well, as you all do all the time, perhaps me more than you, because I'm a clinical psychologist. If the people I'm seeing haven't broken the universal law, then you can bloody well be sure that people around them have. It's no joke. Like, you make a mistake and things will go seriously wrong for you. And so it's no wonder that you'd be terrified at the revelation of the structure that governs our being. One of the things that's so remarkable about the Old Testament, this is another thing Nietzsche commented on. He was a real admirer of the Old Testament, not so much of the New Testament. He thought it was a sin for Europe to have glued the New Testament onto the Old Testament, because he thought the Old Testament was a really accurate representation of the phenomenology of being. It's like,
and that's one of the things that we have realized, and what's going on today is that the whole idea, the breakdown of the family structure, and Gary Lamb talks about this a lot with his relationship sort of lives, is that the breakdown, and even his videos, the breakdown of the family structure has led us to a point where, it's that biblical rule of, honor thy father and thy mother. And I could never understand that one, because, if you have a dishonorable father and mother, how are you supposed to honor them and keep that covenant if they're not, if they're not living up to their ideal or whatever like that. And the reason why I had a lot of trouble with this is that, my parents' divorce was right during my teenage years. So it was kind of that formative age where it's like, how the hell am I going to live up to this sort of Old Testament rule of honor thy father and thy mother, when my mother and father aren't honoring themselves, they're not honoring the family, they're not honoring any of that. My parents' divorce was contentious as all get out. So, but that's one of the things that we've seen in the breakdown of the family structure, is that, our whole society has broken down as a result of it, because we don't have that ability to, and we don't instantiate kids with this idea of, honor thy father and thy mother. The whole society has broken down as a result. And it's that idea of, break these rules and find out what happens. Well, we're finding out what happens, and it's not good.
Stay awake, speak properly, be honest, or watch the hell out.
Yep.
Things will come your way that you just do not want to see at all. And it might not just be you, it might be everyone you know and everything about your culture that is demolished for generation after generation.
Exactly.
Stay awake and be careful. And I think that people only don't believe that when they're being hubristic. And I think that most people know that deep in their hearts. You know, when you get high on your horse, that happens fairly often. If you have any sense, you think, geez, I better be careful and tap myself down a fair bit, because if I get too puffed up, man, someone's going to come along and take me out at the knees.
Yep.
And everyone knows that. Pride comes before a fall. It's like, if you have any, that's why it says in the Old Testament that the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom.
Yes.
Like, I've never, in all my years as a clinical psychologist, and this is something that really does terrify me, I have never seen anyone ever get away with anything at all, even once. You know, there's that old idea that God has a book, you know, and keeps track of everything in heaven. It's like, okay, you know, maybe it's not a book. Fine. But that is a really useful thing to think about, because, well, maybe you disagree. Maybe you think people get away with things all the time. I tell you, I've never seen it. What I see instead is that thing happens, right? Someone twists the fabric of reality. They do it successfully because it doesn't snap back at them that moment. And then like 2 years later, something unravels. They get walloped and they think, oh my God, that's so unfair. And then we track it. It's like, well, what happened before that? This. Well, then what? This. And then what? This. And then what? Oh, this. Well, that's where it went wrong. It's, yeah, because you can't twist the fabric of reality without having it snap back. It doesn't work that way. And why would it? Because what are you going to do? Twist the fabric of reality? I don't think so. I think it's bigger than you. You know, and I think that one of the things that really tempts people is the idea that, well, I can get away with it. It's like, yeah, you try. You see how well that works.
It doesn't.
You get away with nothing. And that is the beginning of wisdom. And that's something that deeply terrifies me. And, you know, ever since last September, when I've come to more like broader public attention, one of the things I'd be terrified of making a mistake, because I certainly know I'm more than capable of making a mistake. And thank God so far, either I haven't made one or no one's found out about it. So, but it's like, you know, we walk on a very thin and narrow edge, and we're very lucky when things aren't degenerating into chaos around us or rapidly moving to far too much order. And it's not an easy thing to stay on that line. And you can tell when you're on that line, because the things are deeply meaningful and engaging when you're on that line. But if you're not existentially terrified about the consequences of wavering off that, then you are truly not awake. So, and that's what I see in this picture. You know, it's like,
that's a good point, Samantha. She says, I learned to let go of my resentment and just be at peace that my parents are mentally unstable. Oh, mine have their issues, but I don't know that anyone besides my father may be mentally unstable. Honor, though, I treat them with respect, but I haven't quite gotten to honor. I think treating them with respect is honoring them. You know, and I pray for my dad all the time. I think he got really screwed up by his stroke, and what happened to him there, because he knew he was having a stroke and he didn't treat it. So I think on a certain level, he was kind of suicidal. And as a result of that, you know, when he came out of his stroke and was still alive, he's kind of just gone hell bent on this path of, you know, what is it? Self-indulgence before he dies. So, and I think that's the wrong way to go. So, and Justice says, Sam, I'm learning that with some family, not my parents, the Grams. But even with our parents, I mean, you know, they sacrificed so much to raise us that we don't even realize until we're adults. And we realize, oh, how much of a burden kids is to a person's life, and how much they let go of in having kids and things like that. I think, you know, that's why a lot of times we only reconcile with our parents once we've become adults. And so that's why I think that whole rule is instantiated, you know, to be followed early on for kids to do this, because we never realize until we grow up how hard being a parent is. And, you know, it's because of that lack of knowledge that we should honor them, you know, respect them. You know, it doesn't have to be full honor. You know, I think respect is good enough. I think respect is kind of in that same sort of sense of honoring them, that, you know, it's only once we become adults that we get that enlightenment. And if if we honor our parents in the meantime, even not knowing the sacrifices that they've made for us, then that keeps the relationship stable. And I think that that's, a big part of the demise that's gone on in our society, is that, kids were taught to tune in, turn on, and drop out. That really kind of destroyed the family structure, and we've been reaping the ill gains of it ever since. But let's get back to Jordan here.
Look out, man.
Yeah,
Because
look
there
out.
are rules. And if you break them, God help you.
Yeah, God help us.
So one of the things that seems to me the case with regard, I mentioned this in the question period a bit last time, is that one of the things that seems to be actually one of the advantages to gluing the New Testament onto the Old Testament is the idea of a transformation in morality that is analogous to the Piagetian idea that after you learn to play by the rules, you can learn to make the rules, because I think that's actually what happens to some degree in the transition between the Old Testament and the New Testament. Because in the Old Testament, most morality is prohibition. Here are things you shouldn't do. It's not fair enough. And that's a lot of what you do with your kids. Don't do this, don't do this, don't. Especially when they're happy, you're always going around telling them to stop being so happy, because all they're doing is causing trouble. It's quite painful if you're a parent and you notice that. But the first morality is prohibition, right? Control yourself so you don't cause too much trouble. And then maybe if you get that down and you're good at it, then the next thing is, well, once you're disciplined, then you can start working towards something that's a positive good. And that's the transformation that seems to me to be fundamentally characteristic of the juxtaposition of the New Testament onto the Old Testament. But in these images, it's still something like serve tradition, serve the Father, psychologically speaking, support the tradition, because you live on it. There, in the old Mesopotamian story, the Enuma Elish, which you can read about if you're interested in, the original gods, who are really badly behaved, they're like 2-year-olds. In fact, they're a lot like 2-year-olds. They kill the primordial god, Apsu, who's the patriarchal god. They kill him and try to live on his corpse. Well, that's what we all do, right? Because we live on the corpse of our ancestors. You could say we live on the corpse of our culture. It's dead. And that's not a great place to live. So you have to keep revivifying it so the damn thing, stays active and awake. You stay on the corpse for too long, and then the devil or the demon of chaos comes back, and that's what happens in the Mesopotamian story. It's like, don't be thinking that you can stay on the corpse of your ancestors for too long without contributing to the revivification of the system, because the chaos that all of that holds at bay will definitely come and visit you. And you see that in stories like The Hobbit. Hobbits, they're nice, they like to eat, they're kind of fat, they're short, they're not very bright, they're hubristic. They have no idea what's out there in the broader world. They're protected, if you remember, by the Striders, who are the sons of great kings, who look like tramps. We have nothing but contempt for them. They patrol the borders and keep the bloody hobbits safe. But out there in the periphery, all hell is brewing and chaos is generating and forming. And that's an archetypal story, and that's why people like that story so much, because that's exactly right. Like, we're the hobbits, and we are protected from chaos by the spirits of our dead ancestors, and we're too damn stupid to know it. And we think, oh, well, we don't need them anymore. And that, to me, that's postmodernism. That's what the bloody universities are doing with the humanities. It's absolutely appalling, and we will pay for it. So unless we wake up, and hopefully we'll wake up, because that would be better than paying for it.
Yes.
Being awake is rather
yes.
painful. So then I had this vision one time, and I kind of portrayed it in this image of what the world was like. And I thought, well, it's not a pyramid. It's not a single hierarchy of authority. That's not what it is. It's an array of hierarchies of authority. So you imagine this sort of infinite plane, and in the infinite plane, there's nothing but pyramids. And inside the pyramids, there are strata of people everywhere, far as you can look. Some of the pyramids are tall, some of them are short, they overlap. It's endless. The plane is endless, and those are all the positions to which you could rise. And everybody's inside the pyramid, sort of crammed up, trying to move towards the top. And then there's the possibility of sailing across over top of all of them and seeing how the structure itself works. And that's the eye that floats above the pyramid and that sees the structure itself. And the highest order of being is not to be at the top of the pyramid. It's to use the discipline that you attain by striving towards the top of the pyramid to release yourself from the pyramid and move one step up. And that's, I think that's one of the things that's instantiated in the idea of the, for example, of the Holy Ghost. So, and I think that's akin to that. That's Sisyphus. And Nietzsche said of Sisyphus, if I remember correctly, that one has to imagine him happy. Well, if there's a rock at the bottom of the hill, then you might as well push it up the hill. And if it rolls back down, well, then you've got something else to do, don't you? To push the damn rock back up the hill. And there's no shortage of rocks to push up the hill. And that's what we're built for anyways. And so let's go out and like push some damn boulders up the hill. And then maybe we could have enough self-confidence and enough respect for ourselves that we wouldn't have to turn to hatred and revenge and try to take everything down, because I think that's the alternative. So he's not weak. That's one thing you can say about him. The same idea represented there, right? That's Atlas, who voluntarily takes the world on his shoulders. It's like the idea of Christ taking the sins of the world on his shoulders. It's exactly the same notion, which is the notion that you should be able to recognize in yourself all the horror of humanity and take responsibility for it, because that's what that means. And the thing that's so interesting about that is that if you can recognize in yourself, all the horror of humanity, you will instantly have a hell of a lot more respect for yourself than you did before you did that.
There, but for the grace of God, go I. I find it amazing how many people I run across that have just horrible stories about, just upbringings and everything else. I mean, I knew a girl once who was glad she didn't have to have the abortion because she had the miscarriage the moment that she walked into the Planned Parenthood lobby, and she was glad she didn't have to have the abortion because it was her father's child. I mean, just think about that for a second. It was her father's child that she had miscarried. And, just trying to grow up with any sort of respect. And, her father was high placed up in the Navy. He was going for his admiralship in the Navy. And yet here he was having a child with his daughter, and so, there are truly, truly, truly terrible parents out there that are impossible to honor. And there was some girls in my high school who had the same sort of problem with their father, and how do you grow up with a proper understanding of God who is embodied by a male figure, if that's the type of father that you have? You just can't do it. It's impossible. But it is possible if we learn how to forgive even a monster like that. And it's not so much that we say that their actions are okay or anything like that. It's that we realize that any one of us could be a monster like that. And part of us will go, I will never, ever be a monster like that. And that's good. But we could still be monsters in other ways that can be just as destructive. And so, it's dealing with parent and child relationships, especially when there's drugs and alcohol involved, when there's, abuse involved, when there's incest involved and things like that. I mean, it's just, how do you function? How do you function? And so it's just one of those, you figure out how to detach yourself from them. You figure out how to detach yourself from the situation. And, like Jordan Peterson kind of became my father figure in all of this. What would I have wanted in a dad? Well, I would have wanted somebody like Jordan Peterson who understood all this, and understood how to do it the right way. Oh, gee, it's okay. I almost napped through it myself. So, just go and catch it on the replay and catch up, or rewind and watch to the beginning. But I mean, we're 6 minutes to the end, but that's all right. Catch it on the replay. But it's still, if you think of a functioning household, if you can imagine that, we still have to have these sort of structural societies. Otherwise, the whole society falls apart, and we're reaping that right now, and it's a terrible thing. So, and if anybody wants to talk to me offline, my email is available in my yeah. Jordan is my pretend dad. Exactly, exactly. That's why I love his talks and stuff like that. So, but if anybody wants to reach me, go ahead and email me through my about section. I think my email is still up in there. And I'd be happy to give you my phone number if you want to talk at any time like that. So, um, but we've got about 5 minutes, and Okie Kevin Edwards snapped through it. Naughty boy. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. It's fine. I figured out today that I was falling asleep because I was falling asleep super early and I couldn't figure out why. It was like 8 o'clock at night and I was falling asleep, and it's my anti-nausea medication and it's putting me to sleep. And I took one this afternoon and almost fell asleep with Mary Lou sitting next to me. And I was like, I got to send you home and I got to take a nap because I'm just, I'm so out of it. And I slept through part of Survival's Live, unfortunately. But I saw Pizza Dad up there and everything. So that was a great bit of fun. I really liked what you guys talked about this afternoon. But yeah, it's we let go of these rules to our peril. And even if we didn't have a functional household, this is the type of functional household that we would like to have. We would want our children to honor us. We're not going to be the same thing that our destructive parents were. Samantha, you sound like you had a hell of an upbringing, probably worse than mine. But if we had kids and we were doing things the right way, we would want them to honor us until such time that they understood what it was that we had done for them. So, that's just one of those rules that kind of is necessary for the growth of all society. The continuation of our species as a whole is we need to respect the family unit. And it's parents that do drugs and alcohol that aren't respecting the family unit, if they do it to the point of abuse. Because certainly you can take drugs responsibly, like heart medication and stuff like that. We can do these things responsibly. We don't have to be irresponsible about it. But we've only got 3 minutes left, so I'm not going to jump into Jordan Peterson again. But I just wanted to thank everybody for being here tonight. You guys are just, I know I haven't been online a lot lately, and that's because I've been working terribly on this website that I hope to get going soon. We've got a meeting on Tuesday. So, yeah, Pizza Dad is a really cool guy. To see him on Survival's Live was awesome. And Pizza Dad, you've got to remember to do your videos in vertical, not in horizontal, not vertical, because a lot of those are really, really cool. And you could definitely sell those. I think I sent you the link on how to sell those. But yeah, so 2 minutes left. I guess any words in closing? Because I've got a little bit of a migraine going on right now, so I'm a little bit antsy to get offline, but I want to do it up till the hour mark, up to the 2 hour mark. Come on, I can hold in there. I can do it. But yeah, I'm glad all of you are here tonight. And next week we'll be doing Thursday night for the book club, and then Saturday night again for the Bible study. And I wish you all a wonderful night. I hope you have a good tomorrow as well. Hopefully I will wake up in time for church. And if not, I'll catch it on Facebook with my mom. But anyway, thank you everybody for being here. And I will see you all next week. So much love. And if you want to contact me, They tried to bury me not knowing I was a C. Absolutely. I can totally understand that one. So rise like a phoenix from those ashes, Samantha. I love you so much. And so, yeah, everybody be well, and I will see you next week.